SUSE is a global leader in innovative, reliable, secure enterprise-grade open source solutions relied upon by more than 60% of the Fortune 500 to power their mission-critical workloads. They specialize in business-critical Linux, enterprise container management and edge solutions, and collaborate with partners and communities to empower customers to innovate everywhere, from the data center to the cloud to the edge and beyond. SUSE puts the open back in open source, giving customers the agility to tackle innovation challenges today and the freedom to evolve their strategy and solutions tomorrow.
Welcome to the Kubernetes Center of Excellence podcast. Nick Marcarelli here with Robert Hodges. Robert, how's it going? How's your Friday?
Great. Oh, sorry. It's going great, Nick. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Awesome. We've taken a little break from really a long summer. We haven't done an episode, so you're our first episode back in a while, which is very exciting. So we usually like to start off with you telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into technology. So give us a little biographical overview.
Sure. Let me start with how I got into technology, or specifically computers. It was in January of 1972, which is a while ago. Our seventh grade science teacher had heard about computers, and he signed up for a time-sharing service. This is back in the day. You didn't actually have a computer yourself, but you had a subscription with a time-sharing service, and this subscription came along with a teletype. It was a beautiful Texas Instruments teletype that could read paper tape and could talk to the time-sharing service through a 300 baud dial-up modem. I think it was 300 baud. It might have even been slower. So it was, it was in the back of the lab. The teletype was there, and the modem, and then a book with a pink cover that said, "Welcome to Washtenaw Computing Services and the Basic Programming Language." And I just opened the book. There was nobody there to show us how to do it. I just opened the book. It taught you how to dial them up, stick the phone in the coupler, and then you could start writing basic programs. And so my first basic program was a geography quiz. Like, what is the capital of Virginia? Richmond. That was one of the questions. And
Gotcha.
Then give you a score at the end. I've been doing computers ever since. So I did it, mostly as a hobby as a kid until about 1978. Got my first real job as a computer operator. That's what they used to call sysadmins, working on IBM mainframes. And then went through 6 startups. I've been working on data and databases since 1983 or so. And this is startup number 6. I got into this one because one of my best friends was working with Clickhouse, had started this company, and wanted some help. So we talked a little bit, and I ended up joining the company.
Gotcha. So talk us through briefly, you got in on the data side. So what did that look like when you started doing data work, and how that's gotten to where you are today? Can you walk us through that journey a little bit?
Yeah, that's great. I was actually in the military and working as a programmer. And we were working on IBM mainframes using 3270 terminals. So at least it wasn't cards, at least not too much of the time. But the unit I was in bought this database called M204. And it's a pretty well-known database developed by Computer Corporation of America. They were located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I think it's fair to say it was the most fascinating piece of software I'd ever seen. You could stick data into it, you could get it out. I learned about how it, what the file structure was like. It used inverted indexes. It was pre-relational, so you had to understand the structure of the data. It didn't talk SQL. We actually were programming it, using a form system called SPF and COBOL, which, people really did do a lot of COBOL back in those days, and I was one of them. And so I was building apps on top of this database, and I loved it. And when I got out of the military, I actually really wanted to go work for these guys, but they had the whole thing was written in IBM assembler. I didn't know assembler, so I didn't get that job. But I did get a job about 5 years later working with Sybase, which was my first industry job on databases. And that was everything from connectivity to front ends to database internals. We tried to write a replacement for the Sybase SQL Server. And that's ever since then, every job I've had either was working on a database directly or working on the applications that ran on top of it.
Got it. Okay. And then fast forward us to your organization today, what you guys are doing, what that's based on. I know it's open source, so
You
feel
bet.
free to talk about that.
Yep, we're an enterprise provider for Clickhouse. It's a very popular, what we call a real-time analytic database. It's one of the most popular analytic databases on GitHub. Last year, there were something like 400 unique individuals who contributed pull requests. It was first developed at Yandex, which is a company that in less troubled times was called the Google of Russia. And they developed this as a custom database to help address or to store data for something called Yandex Metrica. It is a program that is actually a competitor to Google Analytics. It's very popular even today. And so they had a problem, which was when you're reading all this web data, people want to ask different kinds of questions that involve aggregates. Like, hey, looking across these pages, day by day or hour by hour or site by site, what's average time on page? What's bounce rate? All these different things. And then maybe split them out by geographic, originating geographic region. These are questions that you either have to have a database that you either have to guess in advance what people are going to ask, so you pre-aggregate it, and that's kind of what they were doing on MySQL, or you get a database that can actually do it straight off the raw data, within a second or two. That database didn't really exist for them, so they wrote it themselves and ran it in-house till 2016, open sourced it. At that point, one of my best friends, a guy called Alexander Zaitsev, heard about it, and he was running an analytics group in San Carlos in the Bay Area. They were doing real-time bidding for ads and doing all kinds of analytics on strategy. They tried it out, and he loved it. It was fast. It was extremely cost efficient. At the time, they were using Vertica, which is a well-known database, but it was having scaling problems, and it just wasn't cost efficient. So this database was a success, but it was really raw. I mean, to the extent there was documentation, it was written in Russian, had a lot of, you had to use it just right or it would fall over. So he founded a company to help people use it. And that was in 2017. And we built from there. We're now a cloud service provider. We wrote the original, we wrote the Kubernetes operator so that this database now runs cloud native. We have hundreds of customers and both self-managed as well as running in the cloud. And, so it's a really vibrant business with customers doing some really, really interesting apps around real-time data.
Gotcha. So my domain is more infrastructure, Kubernetes for sure, but more on the infrastructure side, less on the less on the data side. So I'm going to ask a question, and it's probably going to be a dumb one, but you help guide me here. So, is Clickhouse the technology underlying, like when it integrates with like a Vertica, like you said? I know some people use like Kafka to do that. Is that a similar type of tool? Is there a big difference?
Actually, there is a difference. So Kafka is what we call an event stream, or implements event streams. So these are streams of for example, let's say you have a monitoring system that collects observability data from hundreds or thousands of hosts running in your cloud environment. You'll stick them, each of those hosts will have a little process which is collecting data and dumping it into Kafka. Our data warehouse is the other end of that pipe. So it's where those Kafka events go to live so that people can, first of all, notice that interesting things are happening, then go ahead and do analyses on them to find out what's going on. Let me make that more concrete. That architecture is really common in things like security event and incident management. So these are very large systems. They could be monitoring hundreds of thousands of devices that are generating, in the aggregate, tens of millions of events per second. They come through Kafka, get dumped into Clickhouse. Clickhouse can first of all handle this level of load, and the answer come in. They're instantly queryable. You can then identify things very quickly that are happening of interest in the environment. And then, and this is probably the most important part, once you see something like, hey, you've got a host that's starting to make requests to a known malware server, you can now sift through the data to find out, hey, when did this start happening? How many other hosts are doing this? Are there commonalities between the hosts? Like, are they running the same app? Is it the same version of the app? And you can then maybe zero in to, hey, there's an app here. Either it's an infection, or maybe there's, somebody's done an attack on one of the libraries you're using, and you're starting to, your applications are infected. Clickhouse, this kind of application, Clickhouse is just built to order. That's what it does really well.
Got it. Okay. No, that's helpful. Appreciate that. So, and I always like to hone in on like what your organization's doing. So, do you have like a high level story you can tell about how you're helping a customer? You don't have to name anybody, but tell us like how you guys are making an impact in the marketplace and changing, transforming something.
Yeah, I can actually, I'd be happy to do that. So we enable people to build these real-time applications. But what that means concretely is we help them with Clickhouse. And we can either provide support for people who want to run it themselves, and that's about half of our customers, or we can take care of running it for them in the cloud and give them support. So why is the cloud part, I think everybody gets. If you stick it in a cloud, you don't have the trouble of running these complex systems yourself. You don't have to worry about backups. You don't have to worry about connectivity. We take care of a raft of security issues. So that is, that's an obvious value add. The support is a little bit more interesting. Databases are complex beasts, and Clickhouse in particular is a bit like a high performance race car. It's great, but you got to point it in the right direction, and you need to use it well. Otherwise, it's either not going to give you the answers that you want as quickly or as efficiently, or it's actually going to break. So we provide the support and the guidance that allows people to use it effectively.
Right, because that database technology is widely free, but actually implementing and care and feeding for it over time is where tuning it. that's the hard stuff, right?
Absolutely. And Clickhouse, like a lot of open source databases, requires, to use it effectively, you actually have to understand what's going on inside. Not everybody has that knowledge, or not everybody acquires that knowledge at the same time. So when a team realizes they have a problem that needs Clickhouse, they can come to us, and we already have the expertise. We know, like everything from, hey, what's going on inside the code? When can we expect bugs to get fixed? Or when will new features arrive? When are they stable? All the way to give me some guidance for how to, set this up, how to do compression, all the things that are necessary to make it work. So we're kind of like supplement the development team so that they don't have to become deep Clickhouse experts.
Sure. And so Clickhouse is, or I guess you're offering for your company, you're doing that on the pure open source. You're just bringing the knowledge, right? You haven't forked it or premium it or anything like that.
That's a big part of our value proposition. So everything we do, and we believe this very firmly, everything inside the reporting stack should be 100% open source. So it's so that if we go away, or the customer, or for some reason we're not available, that this stuff still runs. People should never be locked into this technology.
Right.
Where we supply proprietary software is in management. So things like, obviously the cloud, but also things like, auditing for security, for example. These are things which are necessary to meet compliance requirements or to reduce the effort. But if they go away, your system still runs.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's the funny thing about open source in 2023. What we traditionally have had is that kind of pure play. The code is the code. There's these people that stand up companies that are, they have experts and they help the customer on the journey.
Yep.
And then we started going to the kind of open core to freemium model, just like any other software. And I think it really diluted the value of open source to, I think, a common consumer over time. And we're seeing, I think, a push back to that kind of the roots of open source, where it's I mean, you could say that in some ways, but a lot of the newer technologies have this very like pure approach to open source, which is really refreshing.
Right. I think it's actually kind of a challenging time for open source. Because I think there was sort of an arc. Um, there were projects like MySQL, like Postgres, for example,
Mm-hmm.
like Kubernetes that, established themselves as open source, and, you know, and people built companies around them. So, for example, MySQL, great example, MySQL AB, which, was built around, it was the single company that was, sort of shepherding and and building MySQL, built a huge community around it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what happened over, with companies like MySQL, with the Hadoop ecosystem, venture capitalists realize, hey, there's a pattern here where we can have these projects. They often, reach hundreds of thousands or even millions of developers. So it became kind of an economic or investment pattern where you'd build a huge community, and then, you know, you'd then form a company, inject a bunch of capital in it, build more stuff around it, and then try and just monetize that community. Um, as a result, because of all this VC money came in, been lots of open source projects. The problem that we're seeing right now is that cheap money has dried up because interest rates have gone up. There's less
Sure.
investment going on. So now you see challenges where these companies that, built these projects and delivered great software can't, are not necessarily profitable businesses just from supporting them. Because if people can use them freely, they're not necessarily going to pay.
Yeah, and there was definitely a strategy, I think, around that in
Yeah.
Silicon Valley, right? It's like
Oh, absolutely. It's
go,
a standard playbook.
go get a thing, go get a
Yeah.
big valuation, get
Yeah.
the $1 billion valuation, be a
Yeah.
unicorn,
Yeah.
and it won't matter when you're a founder, right? You're going to get your lick, and it's going to be
Right.
fine.
Right.
But to your point, that could end a project eventually because you still need some infusion of passion or cash.
Yes. Yeah.
And often when the cash leaves, so does the passion,
Yeah.
which is kind of how it's become.
Yeah. The fact is that it is, I think one of the things that people are grappling with today is it is hard to make money off open source projects because if people don't have to pay, many of them won't. Or they won't even contribute. And there's nothing evil about that. That's how human nature works. I mean,
Right.
we do a huge amount of stuff in open source. We try to push, as we have sort of base infrastructure. We push out. It's all Apache 2. We will, while I'm around, we're never going to change that. You know, but at the same time, we consume a lot of open source, stuff I don't even know about that I consume. There's no way I can even contribute to it in that case. So I think, like, one of the things we've seen is, I think the most prominent example of this is HashiCorp with Terraform, which, if you're an infrastructure person, you may have been paying attention to. They're not making money, so they need to, they're in a bit of a bind. They need to, to get more money out of their software. It's hard to do, and one of the ways they've done it is by relicensing, so that they can put
Right.
more pressure on people to get them to pay.
And that's gone over poorly from a sentiment perspective, I would say, in the engineering community.
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult. I don't want to criticize them because I think they're in a bind, but I think it's something that let's say you could see it coming, that if you have something that is free. And actually, one of my favorite management books is Machiavelli's Prince, and he has some pretty good things to say in there about bad things. You don't want to do them don't want to do them much, and then you want to do them all at once, because people react really badly to having stuff taken away. On the other hand, if you're giving people things, you want to spread it out over time so that they appreciate it. So this notion of having something out there that you thought that was free and that you were consuming, having it taken away just creates this really negative reaction. And that's true of anything, even from open source licensing to to anything else you consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, we've seen a lot of strong opinions about that move specifically. And I agree with you. Like, I maybe am somewhat compassionately moved by the position HashiCorp's in around that, because they make great tools.
They're excellent.
Excellent tools, right? So when you make great tools, that it costs money to continue to innovate and make great tools.
Yep.
And you need capital to do that.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing that gets a little lost, maybe just in the engineering community, is that just because it's been free, and it's been passionately worked on, doesn't mean like it'll be like that forever. And and then it also, is that fair, right?
Yeah.
So I'm actually partnered with a monitoring company, and we resell and integrate and do consulting for their stuff in North America, and they are pure open source.
Right.
So they drew a dividing line about a year ago where they said, if you're using enterprise Linux packages, we're going to build those for you, and you're going to pay for them because they're enterprise. You're already paying for the operating system,
right? But
if you're going to use Ubuntu, CentOS at the time, any other free distribution of OpenSUSE, all that, it's still free. So I think they did it really cleverly, where they basically just said, if you're going to have like an Amazon Linux 2 or a RHEL variant, or SLES, hey, you can pay for those packages. But if you're going to do it on Ubuntu, or you're going to do it on Arch or whatever, like, those packages are free.
Right.
And they even got some pushback around that. And I thought that was one of the nicest ways to try to like generate some actual revenue to continue to move the project forward.
I think the other thing, so this was sort of something that we did, was we didn't take a lot of VC money. We did it. We got a seed from Excel, and I'm really grateful to them for supporting us. But we had also decided that, there were some things happened in the market that we never did the Series A and, got on the rocket ship, but it was partly because we didn't want to.
Sure.
We're actually more comfortable running a bootstrap company. The fact is, you don't grow as fast. In some ways, there's a level of stress. You have to be very good at managing cash. You have to figure out how to make money with what you've got.
Right.
And you also have to recognize that you're not going to get the 100-to-1 return on investment that sometimes people can achieve with the right company at the right time. Snowflake is an example of a company that's just been a moonshot in the database business.
Right.
But most companies don't land like that. So that's, I think, in addition to being kind of upfront with your users, you also have to just accept that you're going to have a different business model, and it's not necessarily going to be easy.
Right. Yeah. The easy button is not always the best way.
I think to be, on the other hand, if you take a bunch of money, say you take 300, say 500 million in funding, it's hard in a different way, which is, you've got a runway. And while you're sort of halfway down that runway, things are pretty comfortable and everybody has nice lunches. But there's a time when those folks who gave the money, they're looking for a return on investment. And then you're going to you will have to do things to get that investment that you won't necessarily want to do.
Yeah, and you still got to manage that burn rate at that point, right? It's
exactly.
You don't typically
it's not
call cash flow. It's
how long to
how long until somebody comes calling, right?
The truth is, for us as well, it wasn't just a money thing. I believe in open source. I think it is the best way to develop certain infrastructure software in particular. Open source is wonderful because you don't have to do requirements gathering in quite the same way, because people will come to you and they'll say, hey, I see your product. What you're doing is kind of good. It didn't fix this problem, so here's a PR that fixes it. So it has this sort of self-directing, self-healing character. It's also a great way to disseminate technology just by making it, hey, go, you want to use it? Okay, we're building binaries. You want to build it yourself? Fine, just go fork the repo, run the build yourself. If you see something you don't like, give us a PR. It is a really amazingly productive way of generating, of creating complex system software. So so we're really bullish on open source for that reason. Plus, it's fun. I like open
Yeah.
source communities. The MySQL community, the Clickhouse community, there's sort of really great people in those communities, and part of it is just the sharing and together learning about these problems together, as a group or as an organization, and not just being inside the walls of some corporation.
Right. No, that's totally true. I mean, that's how I ended up here, working in an integrator that focuses on
Yeah,
open source. So
yeah,
it's definitely a completely different, business lifestyle,
yep,
the way you build relationships. So it's quite unique in that way.
yeah,
Um, one thing I wanted to pivot to real quick. You had mentioned that you guys have built an operator.
yes,
Um, so obviously you're running ClickHouse on Kubernetes,
yes,
which is still kind of newish, right? There's purpose built databases for Kubernetes. A lot of the traditionals tend to stay outside the cluster. You call out to it, and I don't think a lot of customers have solved for that or have a great understanding of, when should I leverage a database on Kubernetes. Clearly, you guys have a point of view on this, so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are
yeah,
around that.
absolutely. Well, I can tell you what my previous point of view was. I thought it was crazy to run databases on Kubernetes.
Me too.
I when I when I came to before I came to this company, I was working at VMware, and I went out and I had dinner with a couple guys on the board, because we were discussing could I joining the company, and they said, hey, well, we think Kubernetes is the next big wave of technology, and we want to make ClickHouse run on Kubernetes. And I just thought that was a terrible idea. Part of it was because, not like a few weeks before, I had managed to delete the Helm installation in a production Kubernetes cluster at VMware. And it wasn't just that I deleted it. Any fool can do that. I deleted something I could not see. So it was in the, it
Mm.
was, for Kubernetes fans, it was in the kube system namespace. I couldn't see kube system. I should not have been able to alter things in kube system by issuing the wrong command without specifying a namespace. I zapped Helm, and that made a deep impression on me, because it's like, hey, this thing's not ready for for prime time. There's just no protections inside the cluster. Well, make a long story short, we went ahead with Kubernetes, built the operator, and it's turned out to be really good. First of all, operators themselves are a really great innovation in Kubernetes. I think more than anything else, they made Kubernetes safe for data. And the reason is that instead of having to do these very complex resource definitions, which you then have to manage every single resource, the operator creates a new type of resource that describes the database ideally as simply as possible. Maybe a piece of YAML about 12 inches long. And it not only creates the database cluster in our case, but it also manages upgrades. It also allows you to expand, for example, add disk, flip the VMs so that so the pods have greater compute capacity, so on and so forth. That turned out to be really powerful. So from a management perspective, that's advantage number one. Advantage number two, Kubernetes is very portable. I mean, people talk about portability, and they stress the complexity, but if you move from GCP to Oz and you're not using something like Kubernetes, you're going to have to deal with a whole new set of APIs that do close to the same thing, but just in completely different ways. And when we were initially dealing with this, Terraform support was really good. When we were building our cloud, Terraform support on Oz was really good. It was bad on GCP. So we had like Ansible in one case, Terraform in another.
Yep.
Uh, and that was to bring up to bring up Kubernetes in the first place. But Kubernetes itself, once it was up, our stuff basically just ran, and with no changes in both places. So that's thing number two, that this portability. So for somebody who's running a SaaS, it's a really big advantage. The third thing, and I think this is something that's starting to emerge more clearly, is people don't just run a database, they build a stack. So you have ClickHouse, But for Clickhouse to become a reporting platform, it needs monitoring. So it needs Prometheus, it needs Grafana, it needs ingest tools. It may need Kafka locally. There's a bunch of, and then it may need things like SQL editing tools. What Kubernetes is really good at is, and we see this with projects like Argo CD, you can build stacks. And not only can you build them, but you can store the code in GitHub or GitLab, and you can then incrementally change them in ways that are safe, controllable, and also replicable across multiple environments, like staging to prod, or like Frankfurt to Ireland to US East. That this is something that Kubernetes does very well. So I think there's some big reasons why it has grown, and in spite of the complexity of operating it, it's become a really great environment for running databases and the software that uses those databases.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I mean, that's a very similar compelling argument that we have just around applications.
Yep.
That run on Kubernetes, right? And
right.
I think that what the market's going to figure out in the next few years, big part of what we do at Shadowsoft, is if you can tame what Kubernetes is, and by taming we mean understanding how it works, how it's intended to be used, not just taking a hammer to it when you need a screwdriver, right? It's often a tool problem, and those tools can be people, right? I don't know how this works, so I'm just going to go do the normal kind of sysadmin things that I do and hope I don't kill the thing, right? And that's a lot of our interaction with customers, is that they maybe don't have the experience, the skills, the training to kind of wrangle Kubernetes. That's how they would describe it. And we go, well, no, you just need to understand the Kubernetes. Don't treat Kubernetes like a dog if it's a cat.
Right.
They're different animals, right? And I think the education around that in the marketplace has been slow. A lot of people just think of Kubernetes as like another virtualization platform.
Right. Do you guys use managed Kubernetes? Like EKS or GKE?
Yeah, absolutely. We focus on all the Kubernetes distributions for the most part.
Right.
Because they all have advantages and slight disadvantages based on your use case. So, a managed, Kubernetes service like EKS or AKS or GKE, there's big advantages of that. If you don't want to manage everything, like you don't want to manage etcd, great.
You
should do that. But you are giving something up.
Right.
And it's just understanding what you are giving up.
Yeah, I think those managed Kubernetes for the broader market has just been a game changer. That's another thing I should mention about what drove it, the adoption. We now find that typically when we talk to somebody, if they're on Amazon and they're using Kubernetes, 90% chance they're using EKS. We use it ourselves. It doesn't take, as you say, there's a trade, and you can go into the weeds on that. But the fact is, it's really cheap. I mean, the cloud, it's like 10 cents an hour to run it. It's been a big step forward, because then the amount of complexity that people have to absorb is just then becomes more like, okay, just get the app to work, which is within the grasp of most developers. They can figure that part out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you're not looking for a full-blown development platform, EKS is awesome. And that's why, I think the stat was I think 75% of Kubernetes deployments are on EKS.
Yeah.
Because it's easy. It just works.
It's been phenomenally successful. I had, and actually, people running Kubernetes is hard. Putting an app on it is not that bad.
Right.
And even the running is not too bad. At least in my case, I had an intellectual advantage, which was I came from VMware. And if you've ever used like some of the, like VMware networking, for example, NSX is not, it takes, you have to really wrap your brain around that.
Right.
So coming to the cloud and running Kubernetes didn't really seem that bad at all.
Right. But you had to learn the VMware way to do that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I appreciated the fact that VMware is much more complex, because it actually, the virtualization, I think a principal reason, the virtualization is much deeper than what you get on Kubernetes, because it's fully virtualizing the environment.
Right.
Whereas Kubernetes, you're dealing with containers, which are really just processes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it'll be interesting to see how our friends at VMware navigate the next year as well with the
I,
the
I'm like,
Broadcom.
yeah, thoughts and prayers. They are I still have abundant contacts at VMware, and I wish them well. That's it's a
Yeah.
great company.
No, it's and they've built some great technology.
Absolutely.
I was just at a thing last night in Dallas, Texas, and everybody's talking about the uncertainty around um, virtualization.
Hmm.
And I was like, guys, there's no uncertainty. VMware won the war 10 years ago.
Oh my
It's a
God, yeah.
great product, and
Yes.
there's not even anything that even sniffs as a concern, right?
Right.
So, but customers are always like, cost and investment and product growth, but the virtualization platform is excellent. That's why they've been number one for God knows 15, 20 years, right? So people made careers selling VMware. So
Right, and I think VMware recognized in a very very timely fashion how big Kubernetes was going to be. They sort of missed the boat on OpenStack, and that put the fear of God into them. I know this for a fact because this is something their execs freely admitted that they didn't see that one coming. But Kubernetes, when it arose, Kubernetes is the new private cloud, and it's a different way, it's a different take on the problem, but the problem that it solves is very similar.
yep.
And so VMware was invested in cloud native. I joined in 2014. They had been looking at cloud native, I think, for years before that. They're fairly aggressive about acquiring companies like Heptio and trying to get into the market. Whether they succeed in this broad market where they don't have the advantage that they did with ESX, it remains to be seen. But it's not for lack of trying and not for lack of recognizing the
Right.
importance.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, we hit a bunch of that. So I always like to ask this question. You've seen a lot of different things in your career. What's some advice you'd give a young person who's coming up in technology? Just anything. It could be any anecdote. Maybe something someone shared with you, but just one piece of advice for them.
Yeah, you have to keep learning. And I mean, that's kind of trivial, but maybe I can be more specific. I don't have a formal background in computer science. I do like math, that helps. And but most of what I studied at university was things like Japanese and history and economics. And what, but the reason that I've been able to stay in the game is I'm kind of obsessed with understanding how things work. So always you have to keep digging on the technology. It bothers me intensely if I see a piece of software like we were talking about keychains. I don't understand why they work, and it drives me nuts. And I really need to take the time to understand it. But Kubernetes, like what's going on down there? Figure this out, get it into your head, and just stay current on the technology. And when something new comes up that you don't understand, dig in and understand that too. If you do that, you'll continue to ride these waves. You will never run out of things. You'll never run out of things to learn, not in our lifetimes, and you will stay current and stay relevant in the field, and you'll have more fun. So that would be my, keep learning, keep digging to understand how things work inside, and then apply them.
It's good advice. We've had it on the podcast before from very smart people. The way to continue to grow is to continue to be curious.
Exactly.
The moment you stop being curious,
you should
the
do
world's
something
going to
else.
pass you by.
Yeah, exactly.
Go do something else. Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, give us one last plug on your company, and
Yeah, I'd love to. So we're Altinity. We are a full service provider for Clickhouse. We run it in the cloud. We help you run it in your own environments, and we make you successful with real-time applications that will make your business competitive and make you feel good about what you're doing.
You're built for TV and radio. Look at that. That was a perfect pitch. That was amazing.
I get paid to do that, so it's really not fair. It's part of my job, but it's fun too.
That's good. Robert, thank you so much for your time. It was a really compelling conversation, and thanks for sharing with everybody.
Thank you, Nick. It's been a pleasure being on the show, and I'm sure we'll get together. It sounds like we have a lot of common interests.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Dynatrace exists to make the world's software work perfectly. Their unified software intelligence platform combines broad and deep observability and continuous runtime application security with the most advanced AI ops to provide answers and intelligent automation from data at an enormous scale. This enables innovators to modernize and automate cloud operations, deliver software faster and more securely, and ensure flawless digital experiences. That is why the world's largest organizations trust Dynatrace to accelerate digital transformation.